The dead stay in our hearts because we love them. Aesthetic reparation in Monsieur Lazhar. Together, David and I have been thinking with Monsieur Lazhar as an emotional resource that has undone and made vulnerable some of our previous thinking on loss and on queer temporality. We turn to this aesthetic text together because it provides a queer opening into a dialogue concerning the unconscious's impact on learning, the psychic processes of grieving and reparation, and the emotional life of cultural production. Monsieur Lazhar, which takes the emotional economy of a children's classroom as its setting, does not draw us near to surety about how it is best to grieve. Rather, it compels us to make a better future in recognition that our current set of resources for talking about loss are impoverished, particularly in their understanding of the temporality of grief. A psychoanalytic address of trauma, an unexpected event that causes the subject to reenact, through symptoms, its effect, is animated in Monsieur Lazhar. Our encounter with this film rubs up against contemporary queer tendencies to treat loss as resolvable with a paranoid assurance that it gets better in a knowable future. In the film, traumatic events cause the breakdown of meaning for its characters and scramble self and other here and there, then and now. Our shared viewing of the film has been helping us to repair what has been damaged in us, and in so doing has released a collaborative intellectual dialogue on what we have resisted knowing and how we bring our own queer damage to bear on encounters with aesthetic texts. We are not quick to catalog the film's characters themselves as queer, but do suggest that this aesthetic text induces or touches what Dina Georges might deem queer affects that arrive as surprise or interruption, suspending knowable or teleological time and unhinging proper boundaries and habitual social relationalities. Thus, queer affects do not require a stable LGBTQ referent to have non-heteronormative, interruptive, perverse, or surprising social and psychic resonance or force. For Georges, queer affect offers an occasion for learning because it unsettles the stories we tell about ourselves and about others. Underscoring our engagement with the film also are Melanie Klein's descriptions of the psychic life of children. Klein understood the emotional and imaginative life of infants and children as prototypical of the searing greed, envy, rage, and crushing anxiety that makes us human. The infant's psychic existence, for Klein, is full of sadistic fantasies resulting from an innate aggressive drive. The Kleinian child, for example, is not innocent or naive to an aggressive world. There's an aggression inside of her that makes this child want to hurt the people and things who frustrate her wishes, and then to cut them up into pieces. Melanie Klein's descriptions of her own children, and those she treated clinically, were of children who were full of hate, of spite, and malicious fantasies of hurting their mothers and those they loved. Klein's theory of reparation describes a child dealing with loss and with guilt. Klein suggested that when the infant experiences the mother as unresponsive to its wishes, it wages damage in fantasy. If all goes well, the child will then feel guilt and sorrow and seek to repair hate and alleviate its psychic weight. The stress of love and hate in the infant's psychic governance leaves impressions that are worked out symbolically, both consciously and not, in creative endeavors such as play. Thus, creative expression aims to fix what Klein called a split in the fabric of the world. Imaginative and creative thinking are only possible when ambivalence can be tolerated and conflicting feelings integrated. In Monsieur Lazhar, we encounter children working to creatively represent and repair their brokenness. Monsieur Lazhar invites its audience to adopt reparative practices and to reassemble objects and histories to make them more nourishing. Klein's model of early infantile development helps to explain Monsieur Lazhar as reparative text. This film is attuned to psychic damage and does not work to repress or forestall pain for audience or characters, but uses psychic pain to orient its audience towards new encounters with internal conflicts.
Where discourses of queer progress and practices of banal multiculturalism figure loss within a linear process of overcoming, Monsieur Lazhar stages sustained ethical encounter with the ghosts that haunt and exceed such dominant affective temporalities.
Monsieur Lazhar, we propose, assists in opening up emotions in order to investigate what moves us affectively towards and away from grieving.
Monsieur Lazhar opens on a snowy Thursday morning in a Montreal elementary school playground. Tasked with picking up milk cartons for his classmates, Simon heads to his classroom early, only to find the room locked, and beloved teacher Martine Lachance's lifeless body suspended from a pipe near the windows. Simon warns school staff, who manage to reroute the student body safely back to the playground. The only other student to catch a glimpse of the dead teacher is Simon's friend Alice. With the classroom rapidly repainted and all trace of Martine removed, the school principal assures parents that school will go on. As if out of nowhere, Monsieur Lazhar enters her office, presenting himself as a seasoned Algerian schoolteacher turned permanent resident of Canada, and sympathetically offering himself as Lachance's replacement. Somehow, Lazhar gets the job. But while jocular and compassionate with his students, his initial lessons don't go over completely well. He reorganizes desks from a modern semicircle back into rows, assigns an onerous dictation from Balzac, and takes administrative flack for gently hitting a misbehaving student. By night, meanwhile, Lazhar is plagued by nightmares about the loss of his wife and children in Algeria. We learn he is in fact a refugee claimant seeking asylum in Canada, and faces demeaning interrogation from the adjudicator at the Immigration and Refugee Board. As he awaits the outcome of his refugee hearing, Lazhar devotes himself to his teaching with abundant humility and wit, listening and dialoguing carefully with his students in all their curiosity and pain. Despite a policy strictly segregating teaching and therapy, the teacher repeatedly creates opportunities for students to indirectly confront their loss, assigning them oral presentations on violence in school. In a provocative meditation, Alice confronts Martine's death head-on. When children are violent, she notes, adults give them detention. But the nature of Lachance's violence places her beyond the reach of punishment. Lazhar proudly takes the text to the principal, suggesting sharing it with the school. The principal reacts like a censorious politician, condemning the text as violent. It's life that's violent, not the text, Lazhar retorts. While Lazhar's refugee claim is successful, the discovery of his status ultimately leads to his dismissal from school. Yet the film's final scenes make clear that Lazhar's time in the classroom has imparted an openness to difficult affects that will continue to impress upon students' psychic development.
The film's protagonist, an uncertified and unlikely teacher, invites his students to work through loss, and in so doing offers the film's audience a chance to affectively engage with unprocessed psychic material. Monsieur Lazhar, the improbable pedagogue, and his students are undone by each other. Their grieving corresponds as the film's children work through loss in ways that teach the adult how to make new attachments. For Monsieur Lazhar, teaching becomes a creative and a reparative practice, one that restores the potential for hope. For his students, re-entering the classroom in the aftermath of trauma becomes an invitation to represent injury. In Bashir's classroom, both teaching and learning become the art of symbolizing loss. In partnership, Monsieur Lazhar and Melanie Klein's reflections on the child's psychic dramas insist that children's emotional and intellectual lives are complex and expansive. Both help us to listen ethically for what children can teach adults. Yves Sedgwick's translation of Klein into the realm of the political is useful here. Sedgwick employed Klein's descriptions of how children learn to reform part objects through fantasy into more satisfying whole objects to comment on how our encounters with aesthetic texts might be more attuned to reparation. Reparative practices are attempts to creatively live outside of a call and response between polarized accounts of love and hate, which split the world into good and bad now and then. Sedgwick's proposal for a mode of critique that allows for surprise and for queer pleasures in unlikely places helps to explain Monsieur Lazhar's capacity for destabilizing what we thought we would find in our viewing. Monsieur Lazhar helps to clear a path for his students to heal, encouraging them to know how it feels to acknowledge love that vacillates with aggression and negativity, and how those feelings repair cynicism.
In its more capacious, non-teleological engagement with loss, the film also performs an implicit critique of multicultural and hegemonic narratives of overcoming grief to get better. As we follow Lazhar from hearings with the Immigration and Refugee Board of Canada to an awkward date with a white coworker who exoticizes his past, we come to understand the limits of banal and official Canadian multiculturalisms. Multiculturalism only wants to hear about certain pasts that can be rendered historically discrete, redeemed, and overcome. Yet Lazhar's teaching practice engages in a far messier encounter with the ghosts that populate his world and that of his students. But crucially, this induction of and invitation to grapple with queer affect does not stop at a critique of progress narratives, but offers a kind of parable or fable for reparation. In its recognition of the human condition as a shared condition of loss, Monsieur Lazhar asks how we might look back toward loss together, however incomparable our itineraries and histories may be. The film thus reinvigorates fantasies about better forms of reciprocity and collectivity, better forms of psychic, social, and political engagement among vastly differently formed subjects. The political significance of this invitation to look back queerly to loss lies in its departure from conventional teleological narratives of queer and multicultural progress. Monsieur Lazhar's last lesson for his students, that the dead stay in our heads and our hearts because we love them, invites an unsettling recognition of the human condition of loss, and generates possibilities for empathy and reciprocity across historically incommensurable experiences of trauma.